everyone. Welcome back to the Earthbound Survival Guide. You should be back. You should have been listening all along. There are no excuses for this being your first episode at all. This is the Earthbound Survival Guide podcast, a podcast for all disciplines, paths, players, game masters, and enthusiasts like Josh and myself. I am Dan. With me, of course, is Josh.
I am Josh. Don't listen to him. This is absolutely fine to be your first episode. If you are just discovering us now, and because of when you subscribed, this is the most recent episode that shows up in the feed, you absolutely can listen to this first, and then go back and binge the 42, the 41 episodes plus a couple of specials and other stuff that will, take you through a bunch of time to get caught up.
I just got told. I'm just kidding. On today's podcast, we'll be discussing all things quizzical and gestational. We are going to talk about all the emails we got. Gestational. Things that have been gestating in your mind that you need to bring to fruition.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
okay.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the end. That's the end.
I'm picking up what you're putting down.
Dropping it like it's hot, baby. If you have any questions for us, because we're going to answer a whole bunch of questions today, if you have any, please feel free to email us at edsgpodcast@gmail.com, and we will get to those in a future episode. So, other than that,
yes.
Let's start off with, I think we've got one. Rob sent us
a bunch of emails. We've got one. I've got the first one here. This is an email from Rob, who says, "Hi, folks. Great show as always. Before I get to the anniversary suggestion, for those of you who are just joining us, a couple of episodes ago, we asked about ideas that people might have for a 1-year anniversary show, because we are coming up on that here as our recording date in like a month.
Yeah. So,
people have been kind of suggesting, tossing forward some ideas.
Yes.
Anyway, before I get to the anniversary suggestion, etc., a quick point on Spirit Talk, which was discussed on the Nethermancers episode. The Spirit Talk talent does not, unless there's an errata missing, mention ally spirits specifically, just spirits. I've interpreted this in my game that our Nethermancer can talk with wood, fire, etc. spirits, but that the difficulty level is higher for him as he's got to convince the spirit to talk in that language, and it may be rougher at it. If he rolls low, it might be due to his inability to understand, or its inability to communicate, whichever makes the most sense. In the guides, this is all quite vague, with elemental tongues only being mentioned on a couple of the listed elemental spirits, and spirit talk mentioned as a way to communicate with ant spirits, or invi, which are clearly not ally spirits. Okay, so, valid point that he raises, that the talent does not, in fact, specify ally spirits.
Okay.
I double-checked with Morgan to get a feeling on this, because elementals do have elemental tongues, and I always felt that spirit talk was sort of the ally spirit equivalent of that. Morgan did clarify that I was correct, that it is ally spirits, but also beast spirits introduced with the shaman discipline in Mystic Paths are also communicated with via spirit talk, but that elementals you should not be able to communicate with elementals through that talent. Invi, obviously, are also valid targets for spirit talk. I think if I had to go back and do things over with a little bit more thought and consideration for 4th edition and some of the development work that we did there, I might collapse things even further and just have one spirit communication talent to combine both elemental and ally spirits and everything into just one spirit communication talent, and maybe have that extra success mechanic built in where it is more difficult to talk with spirits not of the kind that you are associated with, because that makes a unified mechanic for everybody particularly useful. If you decide that you want to allow your Nethermancer to continue to talk with elementals using that talent at the extra success level required, that's perfectly all right. Nobody is going to come and we don't have an elite hit squad of Sky Raiders that will drop down through your roof and smash your books into paste because you are not
take your dice away
doing things as written. But the intention and the errata, at least as of this recording, is not in there yet, but it will be showing up in the official errata document fairly soon.
Okay. So
he then goes on, congrats on the 1-year anniversary. I think that the popular podcast statistic out there is that the vast majority of podcasts don't make it past episode 1, and many don't make it past a dozen or so. Glad you all stuck to it. So thank you for that. He does go on a bit more with some other suggestions and discussions.
My first podcast made like 14 episodes. My second made 6.
He actually said he preferred not to be read on the show, which is fine. We will honor that. As of this recording, I haven't actually responded to him yet, but I do want to. He brings up some very cool and good stuff that I want to reply to him and whatnot. Thank you for the email, Rob.
Absolutely. Yeah, so to clarify, spirit talk for Nethermancers is only for ally spirits?
Ally spirits and beast spirits. I might be inclined to, like, say, if you're a Nethermancer and trying to talk to a beast spirit, you need the extra success the same way that you, like, or vice versa. But yes. The errata will officially state at some point that spirit talk does not allow communication with elemental spirits.
Okay, fair enough. And then because the elementalists, their elemental tongues is only
Correct.
elemental spirits for them. So just there will be a delineation made. Okay, making sure. Want to just summarize that in one quick sentence. Okay, on to a self-proclaimed Earth Dawn junkie, Vince. Hi guys, I am curious about how spell creating will work with the new mechanics of thread weaving. I was in the process in a previous campaign of having my human Nethermancer create a spell called Brittle Bones that reduced the target's wound threshold. We were looking at how the balance of mechanics of it and were basing it off the rules stated in one of the earlier books, such as adding small bones being crushed to the character's hand to require a bit more process, which in turn would help lower the required number of threads. How would you work this spell, Josh? So it's the first question. Will there be any mechanics put out about spell creation for characters' benefit or edification?
First edition Magic: A Manual of Mystic Secrets
asked and answered.
First edition Magic: A Manual of Mystic Secrets did have a spell creation system where you would, based on the type of spell that you were trying to make and the effect and method by which it was doing things, and a whole bunch of like modifiers, plus and minus, and in the course of designing you would make thread weaving tests or read write magic tests, or I haven't looked at that system in ages, so I don't remember the specifics, but that basically it allowed you to create a spell and the magician would make tests to determine like how many threads it actually required and a whole bunch of stuff like that. 4th edition, we are not planning to actually release a spell design system along those lines for a couple of reasons. One, spell design and balanced spell design especially is as much art as it is science. It is a lot more complex than just simply throwing a bunch of modifiers onto a sheet of paper to figure out where things should be. It's possible for a sufficiently motivated individual to kind of look through spells and get a rough idea of how things work, but we're not planning on any kind of official, here is how you can build your own spells. I understand that some people are looking for that, but it is something that we're not particularly interested in because it is very, very difficult to present a system like that is not subject to abuse. And we don't really want to encourage somebody to find the weak points in the system, break them, in order to create an overpowered and overbalanced spell, and go to their GM with it and say, oh no, this is fine because it's made according to the rules in the book. While we certainly support the idea of the game master basically saying no to anything, even if it is something that is in the books, it's a lot easier to just head that off at the pass by not having a spell design system like that in place in the first place. That said,
especially with the new wrinkle of the extra threads.
Well, yeah.
That 4th edition has presented.
Right. The extra...
That just adds a whole...
Yeah, the extra... Honestly,
rules.
I think when it comes to spell design, the extra threads consideration is probably one of the easier aspects of it, because those are fairly standardized if you go and look at the spells in the books. But, yeah, the extra threads mechanic does give spells, as we've discussed in previous episodes, a little bit more life and longevity in an adept's career. Mm-hmm. And which is something that's kind of causing a little bit of problem when it comes to looking at what higher circle spells are going to do and the kind of design space that they'll be in, because it's no longer just a case of, oh, it'll be like this lower circle spell, but more. They need to bring a little bit of something new to the table. Anyway, to kind of address the other part of his question where he's like, if you have a requirement in order to cast the spell, like needing to do a lot of little bone manipulations or something like that, that more involved bit, if you are creating a spell
or physical component. Yeah,
that could be something that could justify why a spell would have more threads, because the description, the process of how a spell is cast that is presented in the books is usually tied to how complex the spell is in the first place and how much time you need to spend sort of preparing it and casting it. the way that I see it, a spell that would require you to do a lot of little fiddly bits and manipulation might require more threads. And maybe because it requires more threads, it might end up being a little bit lower circle than it might otherwise be if you didn't have as many threads for it, right? That again, more art than science, but the idea being that a spell effect should be roughly equivalent to, other spells in the same circle. Also understanding that a circle 5 to 8 spell, right, a journeyman tier spell, the magician is going to have access to an enhanced matrix. And so that, extra thread that is potentially woven beforehand will factor into the balance of things. And there's a whole bunch of considerations that you need to look at. So I would not look at like, oh, well, he needs to do all this little fiddly stuff. Therefore, I need to have fewer threads because there is this complex requirement. So I can get away with fewer threads. I see that the complex description is a function of the fact that it needs a lot of threads to be woven.
Fair.
There was another question about the suitability of there was another question in there, right? About the suitability, like would the,
is reducing wound threshold possibly game breaking or what?
No, I don't think it is, in part. And I'm trying to find where it is here. There is at least one knack that allows, hold on, I'm looking it up here right now. There is a third rank 3 Nethermancer spellcasting knack, one of their cantrips called Bleed.
Nice.
If successful, the target suffers -2 to their wound threshold until the end of the next round. So it is absolutely, especially if you're looking at it as a Nethermancer spell, it is boom, right in their wheelhouse in terms of that.
Wheelhouse.
I would think that
totally
the spellcasting knack being rank 3, I would probably start off with that spell maybe being benchmarked at circle 3. Just to kind of draw that parallel there, and then, play around a little bit with it there, understanding that as opposed to the cantrip knacks, those spellcasting knacks that you can do, where they're only limited to a single success, you don't get enhanced results on really high rolls. When you're dealing with a spell, you do need to factor that into account, and that could be something to look at. I would say probably rather than going with the -2, I would say that maybe you'd be looking at a base -1 wound threshold per spellcasting success.
Oh, there you go. I could see that. Yeah.
That again, this is right off the top of my head. This is just kind of thinking, it's certainly a valid effect to look at for a Nethermancer. You'd probably looking at it being a like higher novice tier or low journeyman tier, and then you start tweaking with like range and effect, and there's a whole bunch of variables in there to kind of go with a balance. But basing it off of the bleed knack as a start is I think a good place to look.
No, fair enough. So thank you, Vince.
Bleed knack, page 106. Yeah, page 106 of the Earthdawn 4th Edition Companion, if you are looking for where it is.
Cool. So Vince says he loves the game, appreciates us both shedding more light on the game in all aspects. Thank you, Vince. Hope to hear from you again soon. On to Stephen. Firstly, thanks for the podcast. Keep them coming. We will. We got a lot of content to go over. Not running out of time soon. Yeah. Technical difficulties notwithstanding from last episode. Now the obligatory flattery is out of the way, he can get on to ask his question. Can an illusionist cast spells on party members without their awareness that they are the focus of an illusion? To explain, he's conceptualizing an illusionist character who prefers not to advertise too widely that he's an illusionist, basically not giving that truth away for free. Can he buff allies with a monstrous mantle without their knowledge? The illusion apparent to foes, but not the ally. So the range on Monstrous Mantle, just for example, is touch. So
my feeling,
you can walk up, put your hand on their shoulder and say, go get him, man.
Yeah. My feeling on that is, and having an illusionist whose approach is, I don't want people to know I'm an illusionist, is perfectly valid. I think that is a good way, it is a great way to approach things if you want to go that route.
It's a nice little nuance for role-playing.
I want to distinguish, however, between the target of the spell knowing that they're the target of an illusion and knowing that they're the target of a spell. I think that I would have no problem with the party member who is the target of, say, Monstrous Mantle, not being aware that it is in fact an illusion and just think that they are being buffed. I wouldn't handle it mechanically any different. I wouldn't have the... If the party member rolls really well, to potentially sense it's an illusion, it would, like, I wouldn't allow the illusion to be disrupted in that circumstance. I would not, however, be in favor of them not being aware that they are the target of a spell at all. I think the process of casting the spell, I think the way that the metaphysics kind of works in the background, they would be aware that they are being the target of something. And since even if they know that their companion is an illusionist, like if they may have figured that out at some point, illusionists still cast real spells. So there's nothing that says that the illusionist needs to tell them that it's an illusion. There's nothing that requires the target to be aware or cognizant of that. But yeah, that's the distinction that I would make. They are perfectly capable. They are perfectly aware that they are the target of a spell. They just don't have to know that it's an illusion spell that's doing it. Otherwise, you get into some really bizarre situations where, you don't even know I'm casting a spell on you, but now you have like bonuses to attack and defense and things like that in the case of Monstrous Mantle that just start to break stuff from a in-setting narrative standpoint.
Fair enough. Stephen, keep them coming. We like the questions, man. Honestly do. So let's move on. We actually got a character email, and it's not Kagorsi. So Kagorsi, you have company now. Sedgwick decided to write us as well, and he has a question for, I believe, just the both of us here. Dear Dan and Josh, I'm a Windling Skyreader, and I'm having a blast being a maniacal, aggressive pixie that sets himself on fire, kicks ass, takes names, and drinks trolls under the table. One of my fellow party members, a dwarf weaponsmith, has asked to apprentice to me, and I am trying to percolate my thoughts on the matter. Obviously, there are significant upsides to me personally, as it will increase his combat effectiveness in a variety of ways, bring us one step closer to having a fully fleshed out airship crew, and reverse which one of us is constantly in debt to the other. Yet, he is methodical and purposeful in the way he practices his discipline, not audacious or reckless, and also he can't fly without an airship, a serious strike against him. What thoughts can you give me on how to proceed with evaluating his suitability for the Skyraider, and are you by any chance having an episode on this discipline soon? Love and kisses, Sedgwick Sandalwood, Scourge of the Seven Skies, and greatest pirate this side of the Glenwood Deep.
Well, we'll answer that.
P.S. Thanks for all the insightful discussion, especially the recent discussion on interaction tests. If you haven't picked a date for the Skyraider broadcast yet, may I humbly suggest September 19th. More love and kisses.
So, Sedgwick, the Skyraider episode went up last week. I understand
Thanks for tuning in.
Why September 19th, for those who are not aware, is International Talk Like a Pirate Day.
Arrgh!
That episode dropped a little bit before that. This is the episode that is actually dropping right before Talk Like a Pirate Day, at least as our schedule currently holds. So you got your Skyraider episode.
Yes.
There you go. Answer that tail end stuff first. To get back to the original question with regards to testing or feeling out the suitability of your weaponsmith companion to be a Skyraider.
Yeah. Well,
man, that's tough.
Skyraiders are fresh in our mind. That's actually not a bad thing since we just did that episode.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you have thoughts? Well, let's start with you, Dan.
Since this is our second run through this, because we did email this last time and the whole file got wiped out, I am merely just going to lay the groundwork for you because you have a better explanation than I do in the first place, which is the mentality of each discipline is incredibly different, and where those mash up is kind of the hard part. So, as you already pointed out, he's methodical and purposeful. Skyraiders can have method and purpose to their stuff, but they are just usually more aggressive. So, Josh has a better explanation.
Smash first, maybe ask questions of the corpses.
Maybe.
There are generally two approaches when it comes to multi-discipline characters. Adepts who might choose to follow a second discipline. Option number one is to be following two disciplines that are kind of temperamentally aligned, or have a lot of kind of philosophical tenets in common, in order to kind of make that melding that and go with kind of tend to go with a more unified philosophy that allows them to sort of pursue both paths simultaneously. Common approaches with this would be like a troubadour swordmaster, because there's a lot of that performance and social aspect that is strong in both of those disciplines. The swordmaster can kind of enhance the combat capability of the troubadour. The troubadour can kind of allow the swordmaster to get a little bit more performance and social pizzazz into his fighting.
Yeah.
that's just one example.
Or a scout thief,
Weaponsmith and Skyraider in that approach have a lot less in common. That the way that they approach things, the weaponsmith, as mentioned, tends to be more methodical and planning and patient, and that is not the hallmark of your typical Skyraider. Especially, it sounds like our friend who sent in this email here, tends to sounds to be a bit more ferocious. Yeah, Sedgwick sounds like a bit more impatient and ferocious and aggressive, which is great. So that
love it.
That can be very difficult. The other approach, and this is one that's kind of talked about in the initial how to be an adept essay in the old Adept's Way. This is not one that's associated with any of the particular disciplines, but the one that's at the beginning, kind of talking about the nature of being adept itself, talks about how, because the author of that essay does follow multiple disciplines, and talks about how he approaches it as, depending on which magic he is using, needs to take on the philosophy and mindset and approach of the discipline that he is following for that. And that is something that does allow potentially for a bit more of a diverse philosophical approach between the disciplines, which is to say that when he is using weaponsmith talents, he would approach things as a weaponsmith, and when he is being a Skyraider, he would approach things as a Skyraider talents, he would approach things as a Skyraider, and like his approach and philosophy and whatnot would depend on which path he is pursuing. The trouble that you run into with that one is that there are some talents in common, like melee weapons. Yep. He learned melee weapons as a weaponsmith, like he has that as one of his discipline talents at First Circle as a weaponsmith, so he already presumably has it several ranks higher. If he is going to be fighting in combat as a Skyraider, right, and be using Fireblood and Great Leap and some of those talents that we talked about last week that are kind of the hallmarks of the aggressive style of a Skyraider, is his weaponsmith approach to wielding a blade going to affect or cause talent crisis issues with his Skyraider discipline? Like, that's the sort of thing that kind of needs to be figured out if that's going to be the case. It's possible that... Yeah. That the weaponsmith in question just might not be suited to be a Skyraider. That is a possibility. Temperamentally, philosophically, it might be something that he is not capable of doing, which, would be a shame in some respects, but is perfectly fine.
And that's not just because he's a dwarf. We think dwarf Skyraiders would be awesome.
Oh yeah, dwarf Skyraiders can be great. That's fine. There's an entire, like, one of the Highland troll moots in Crystal Raiders has a whole family, has a family or multiple families in it that are dwarves. It's kind of dwarves and trolls makes up the clan. I think one of the things that you would need to do when you are judging the suitability of your companion to potentially be trained and initiated as a Skyraider is to challenge them to approach things or behave in ways that are in line with your philosophy and the teachings and the lessons that you would impart him as a novice, an apprentice Skyraider. Yeah. That he would need to be a little bit more impulsive, a little bit more aggressive, a little bit less meticulous, and so forth.
Yeah,
that's the sort of thing to step back here to the out of character portion. That is something that would need to be negotiated and discussed, I think, at a table level between you and the player of the weaponsmith and the game master to figure out, okay, this is something that we want to pursue. What kind of role-playing things are we going to get into it? Is there something that we can work out and maybe discuss to figure out beforehand how this is going to be, proceeded? It sounds to me like the question is sort of like based in the role-playing and setting concerns about that, as opposed to just, oh, well, he wants to be a Skyraider now, so we're going to teach him Skyraiding and not be so much in the philosophy and role-playing aspects of following the discipline. It's possible. I think it potentially makes for a very interesting subplot and story in the ongoing tale of the campaign. It sounds like it's not something that should be easy, but
nope. I think it makes for a wonderful characterization.
Yeah. Let us know how it goes.
Love to hear more. So, yeah, Sedgwick, please keep us abreast of that situation and let us know how your dwarf weaponsmith is coming along. Because that sounds like fun. On to Ken. And Ken had an interesting question for us as well. It's about a knack.
Ken, incidentally, Ken is one of the players in the Legends of Earth Dawn actual play game. I think Ken plays...
Nice. Cool.
He plays one of the other casters. I am now blanking on whether he plays the Elementalist or the Illusionist. I think he plays the Elementalist. I think he's the Dwarf Elementalist. Anyway.
The Elementalist. Yeah, that sounds about right. So, Ken, thank you for local Union 376 Ironworkers. So, he has a question about using a knack of Shield Drive. If I use Shield Drive, does that use my one instance for Shield Bash that I get for a round? Or can I do both Shield Drive and Shield Bash? So, it is listed as a simple action.
Yes.
And Shield Bash is a simple action, and I think Shield Drive is also listed as a simple action.
Right. Shield Drive is on page 103 of the companion. But what I would call attention to is to the general rules of
preamble.
The preamble before you get into the actual knacks themselves. And this is on page 77, page 76 and 77, that you can only use a particular knack or a knack off of a talent once unless it specifies otherwise. So the choice is that you would use the normal Shield Bash or Shield Drive, unless the knack in question has standard effects as basically the keyword at the beginning of its description. And what that basically means is that you still use it as a knack, but it does the standard effect of the talent plus the additional benefit of the knack. So Shield Drive, in this case, basically replaces your normal use of Shield Bash for the purposes of your use that round. You cannot both do your normal Shield Bash and do the Shield Drive.
Okay. So it sounds like we need to have a knack episode rather soon, because this is our second question with knacks recently.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's slated. We'll get there. Promise. Promise we will.
Shield Drive knack does not mention standard effects. So it uses the normal, it uses the abilities, the effects as described in the talent knack on page 103 and 104, opposed to the normal Shield Bash.
So yeah, it just replaces Shield Bash for that round. Okay. On to Shannon. Shannon had an idea for our 100th episode, or possibly anniversary episode, which is possibly to do an interview with Lou Prosperi. And to that, I hesitate. Only because I can't say it's been done before. I can't say it's been done ad nauseum. We'd love to hear from Lou, but I have nothing new to ask him. So until I can think of a really great set of questions to last an hour,
there have been...
I don't have any.
There have been some interviews that he has done recently. He did one back with the Live from Bar Save crew, Chad and Rachel. He did an interview with them. He's appeared on a couple of other podcasts and whatnot over the last few years. Some of them talking about Earth Dawn, some of them talking about other stuff. But he's been on a few shows, and as Dan has said, certainly. I mean, I've known Lou at least as an acquaintance for quite a number of years, going back to the mid to late 90s and the old mailing list days when Lou was the line developer at FASA for Earth Dawn. And so we've known each other, in passing for a while. And I feel kind of the same way as you do, in that while I would love to, in some, like having Lou on the show, I think would be interesting, provided we could come up with maybe a slightly different angle than the questions that have come up for him before, because those have been asked, and maybe people haven't heard them and it would be the first time or whatever. But I think for us as hosts, as the people who would be talking with him, there would be I think if we were kind of going over the same ground that we had heard in interviews with him in the past, it would lack a certain authenticity, for lack of a better term.
Sincerity.
Like we might not be as engaged as since I don't know that we would necessarily be as engaged or interested in what would be going on, but maybe the solution to that would be rather than us trying to come up with questions ourselves, would be to perhaps solicit questions from our listeners. that if they have questions that they would want to ask, and potentially that those could then prompt a discussion between the three of us, with regards to the topics or whatnot. I don't know. Lou has mentioned that he would be open to being on the show. There's also the technical aspect that we haven't really explored in terms of how we would do that. I know that it's fairly easy to get like the recording off of a Skype call or something like that. Like, it doesn't strike me as being something that would be too particularly difficult. We just haven't looked into it because it's not something that is part of our production process. But it feels a little bit short notice to have that be the first anniversary thing, but maybe something a little bit further down the road as a possibility.
Commenting on our posts on the Earthdawn Guild, he's listening to our show. Hi, Lou. How you doing? Drive safe. Be safe. So, not like we're not getting feedback.
Yeah, I mean, he hasn't. I don't know how. Yeah, well, he hasn't because he hasn't been commuting like so many other people have not been commuting these past several plague-ridden months. I don't know that he is necessarily up on the episodes the way that he was back when he was commuting and could basically listen to the show when it came out, in the next couple of days during his drive to and from work. But, whatever. That's something we can certainly, other people have mentioned it and we can take it under advisement and look into that in the future.
Yeah, Shannon says maybe not the anniversary, but the 100th episode, which is a ways away. So maybe we could figure that out. We got some time.
That's another year.
We can file those away and we can bring them all back out when the time comes. So otherwise, Shannon recommends some Earthdawn marketing ideas because we've asked for other ideas on how to get Earthdawn in front of more eyeballs and make it more mainstream. Gaming stores and so forth. Maybe find someone willing to run and showcase their game on YouTube or stream it to draw some eyeballs. Maybe partner up with one of the VTTs out there, kind of like the Roll20 Presents shows Adam Coble used to do. So those are some ideas. Thoughts?
Yeah, that is one of the most common suggestions. It is also something that has been in the back of my mind. I have mused, I think even publicly once or twice, that getting attention or getting featured on one of the larger streaming or podcast shows out there would be pretty cool. That's a matter of figuring out who to approach and how to handle that from a sponsorship kind of aspect, because if we're going to be asking somebody else to kind of do that, even on a short series or limited basis, I would want there to be some kind of compensation on their part for doing that marketing work for us. I would also be very interested in seeing that be a show that tries to reflect the diversity that we aim for in seeing women and indigenous / black / people of color on the cast, that sort of thing. And I don't have a lot of time to do a lot of research and follow that myself. So it would be something that would need to be dedicated to. I know that there are actual play shows like Legends of Earthdawn, and some shows that have been on YouTube and whatnot. And much like Rob's email back at the beginning of the episode, a lot of shows don't make it past, the first dozen episodes. There was it last summer? I don't know. Time is weird these days, but there was a streaming show that was on Twitch and had the episodes on YouTube. I know that there are other actual plays and stuff that have been showing up. I would also probably want to see something that if it's going to be like a sponsored production like that, to see production values.
Yeah, because, there used to be all kinds of gaming magazines, Dragon, Shutty, and whatnot, White Wolf magazine, and I don't recall if any of them are still out there anymore, because I haven't seen any at a game store in quite a while, so...
Yeah, you've mentioned this before in the past. The only one that I know of offhand that is kind of still going around is Knights of the Dinner Table. Which is sort of half comic book, half gaming magazine. That one is apparently still going on. Although it's, the days of the brick and mortar store being the hub of where people find out about the latest gaming news and stuff like that are...
Yeah, fair.
They are very different than it was 15, 20 years ago. Back in the heydays of that sort of thing.
KODT has 36,000 subscribers. They still mail them out every month, so that people just can get them direct to their mailbox.
So that is something. Another couple of things that other people have mentioned is looking into possibly doing a bit with like Humble Bundle, which are like they're a sort of semi-charity thing online that will have like special deals where they do with them with RPGs occasionally, where you can get like pledge a certain amount and get certain books. And I have not looked into what the logistics of such a thing, what they would require from us, kind of thing. And that's also like any time we get into a situation where we would be spending money, that is taken out of my hands. I don't deal with the money. It would be a matter of putting together a good pitch, and, our budget is somewhat limited, and it would basically, a case would need to be made for, is the money that we are going to spend on this going to justify the increased visibility and potentially more sales that could come about as a result of it. And that's a big question. We have successful Kickstarters. We raise, decent amounts of money. Perhaps some things could sort of be combined, and we could have a situation where we maybe get a sense of what it would cost to sponsor an actual play show for a little bit, and have one of the stretch goals for a Kickstarter for a book be, we will, sponsor X episodes of a show or something like that, to have that be done. I don't know. There's some great ideas have been coming in, and we're kind of just like filing them away, and we'll start looking at what is feasible in the future.
Love the guerrilla marketing ideas. Keep them coming, people. So on to Steve. Hi, Dan, Josh, alphabetically speaking. So apparently you're more important, but I'm just alphabetically superior. Who knows? I'd be interested in hearing about your favorite characters that you've played or had in your groups. Similarly, great dynamics within groups. I know Dan GMs mostly pre-published adventures, so without spoilers, do either of you have any favorite scenes with your games where the players came up with a plan of action you hadn't expected, but that was all so good you went with it? I.e., Needle's use of Clarion Call and Parlength. I think 40 minutes into this episode, we might have to shelve a lot of the discussion about our favorite characters, because we could probably go on for hours.
Yeah, my favorite. I mean, my favorite moment. I really, really love the Riders on the Storm. My first really successful long-term Earthdawn game. That's the one that has Tomas and Ulm and Solar and Rensel, characters that are now immortalized and remembered in their own way. In the examples given in the player's guide and the game master's guide. Mika, the swordmaster. That group is near and dear to my heart. That was a game that ran for, 2 or 3 years, and was very, very successful. My favorite moment from that game probably came about as a result of something that I came up with. When I first conceived that game, I decided to try playing around with a merit and flaw system. Not really tied into Earthdawn at all, but just having a list of things that people could choose, merits and flaws to maybe enhance role playing or provide little bits of bonuses. And Doug, the player of Mika, the dwarf swordmaster, decided to take as a flaw a delusion of the belief that he was in fact human and not a dwarf. Basically playing off of Captain Carrot from the Discworld novels, who was a human that was raised by dwarves in Discworld, and so has a very kind of dwarf outlook on the world. But he's not, Carrot is not really deluded that he is a dwarf. He just he's culturally speaking, he is a dwarf, though he is, 6'2", human, whatever. But Mika was always sort of presented as he is physically, numerically speaking within the game, he is a dwarf, but he believed that he was a human. And Doug was a great player in the sense that he was always willing to, give the GM some rope to hang his characters with. And what I ended up doing was coming up with a backstory for his character where the reason that he thought he was a human was because he actually was. And that Mika was the result of an experiment by a Nethermancer into immortality, essentially. The idea being that the body was a magically created, the result of a powerful Nethermantic ritual that was basically creating a clone body. And then the spirit of the Nethermancer who was doing these experiments, the idea being that he would create a younger clone of his body and have his spirit bonded into the new body, and therefore to continue living. And so Mika physically resembled this Nethermancer because the ritual that created his body basically created the body that looked like the Nethermancer. And the ritual, but the ritual that they performed to bond the spirit was bonding a human spirit, but something went wrong and kind of caused some problems. And so the spirit, like, basically didn't really have any kind of memories of his past or anything like that, but except for the belief that he was, in fact, human. When this detail kind of first finally came up in the campaign, as a result of them seeing another person who looked identical to him showing up and being hunted by assassins because the Nethermancer wanted to get rid of the failed experiments. Tomas, the wizard in the group, like, looked and made a reasonably high astral sight roll and kind of noticed some things about his pattern that was a little bit weird and decided, I'll cast Dispel Magic on him. And cast Dispel Magic and then rolled the effect test and got like a 25, like some ridiculously high number. Like some, like for first edition Dispel Magic result was very, very high. Like high enough that it inconceivably could have dispelled a Circle 15 spell. Like that kind of higher result. The idea being that, at least as I had originally conceived it, would have killed him. Like, Dispel Magic cast on him in this sense would have just killed him outright. I mean, I rolled with it. I didn't kill him. But, like, I went, oh, well, okay, give me a moment to, like, think on this. And I took, and I mean, like, I worked it out. But that was, like, one of my favorite moments, in large part, not so much because of the conception of what the player did and I rolled with it, but more that the player did something that had a roll that the result of the dice was so far out of, like, my expectation of what was likely to happen that I had to improvise madly on the spot, come up with a reason why he wouldn't, and then, like, present information that maybe hinted at what was going on without, like, immediately, So no, that was a great moment. I love that.
Since Steve asked the question, and I do mostly run, I've been running this game for about 20 years or so, and finally get convinced my players to come play Earth Dawn. I've only been playing a little bit off and on here and there. So my favorite characters, I've got 3, but most of these were before 4th edition ever came out. So we were using the Earth Dawn companion rules from the 1st edition to actually make some disciplines of our own. Because we cobbled some from the Earth Dawn Journal and remade those because they weren't quite what we were looking for. But we made a combat mage and we made a mystic warrior, and I've got one of each of those. My combat mage is an Obsidian, love him to death. Fantastic character named Zadornin Bitor, which means Saturn conquers. And yes, I'm aware of the irony of naming a rock man after a gas giant planet. That was the fun part. Anyway, my combat mage. My mystic warrior is a Tiskrang named Bomani Nu, and that is I think it's Egyptian for the god of nothing, because he can't use armor or weapons. So I just like naming my characters the things that mean things. My second favorite character is my third is my dwarf thief, who is named Asanon Oro, the bringer of gold, but he does not touch dead things. So if you killed it, he's not going to loot the body. Everyone was like, I'm going to go loot the bodies. He's like, no, I'm not looting the body. I'm a thief. That's not stealing. They're already dead. They can't defend themselves. They don't know that I'm stealing from them. It's not really theft at that point. So he just doesn't touch dead things, which is, I find a nice little character moment to have. But no, mostly my players have, over the course of the last 20 years or so, created some fantastic characters. 6 of them make up the majority of this group called the Ignilators. My late brother named the group because they tend to ignite and annihilate bars. They just have this tendency to be pyromaniacs. Things burn down to the ground, and so they're called the Ignilators. They are getting some renown throughout Bar Save. There's 6 main characters: Roax, the Mystic Warrior; the Orc Mystic Warrior; Warwick, the Orc diminutive orc combat mage pyromaniac; Kyrok, the human troubadour; Zotina, the orc horror stalker; Jade, the obsidian warrior; and my late brother played Tolemon, the troll weaponsmith. So I had a whole bunch of really big characters running around. So anyway, we have lots of fun stories I won't get into now. Not that we're running short on time, but anyway, I just need to give my group a shout out. Love playing with those guys, and we'll get back to those adventures here pretty soon. So thank you, Steve. Yeah, we will absolutely be getting there pretty quick. And so our last email of the night is actually going to lead into our final topic of conversation. Shannon, I think, wrote in the second one. Thanks for taking my email a couple of weeks ago. I know you guys have a ton of topics you want to discuss, but I think a show devoted to discussing how to stand an Earth Dawn game up from scratch for players and GMs new to the game would be immensely helpful. The Earth Dawn lore and systems are dense and can be daunting to look at, let alone tackle. So, Shannon, the rest of this conversation is in response to that. So I think we can cover 10, 15 minutes on exactly how to create adventures from scratch. I have a very limited mindset on how to do so because I don't really do it for Earth Dawn a whole lot, but I have some advice from another game I did it a lot for. So Josh, since you have written adventures for conventions, let's start there because those are like quick down and dirty, don't have a lot of time.
Yeah, the first thing... before even getting to particular adventures, I think the thing that I would stress for game masters coming new to it, having groups, having players that are new to Earth Dawn, is to not worry so much about getting all of the lore and background and stuff down. I think that the basic information that you can get from the sort of introduction of the Earth Dawn book that basically presents the overall sort of idea of, magic rises and falls. When the magic was high, the horrors come through, people hid away, kind of the horrors ruined the world for a few hundred years. It's now after that people are reclaiming the surface. Like that's a fairly basic concept and you can do so much with that without needing to get into all of the details of the history of Thrall and the interactions of that in terms of the wealth of detail that's available in the various source books. Maybe like go through the bar save primer that's at the back of the player's guide to get kind of a general idea of bar save if you're going to be running your game on that. But what I might suggest that you do is start off with your player group. If it's been agreed that you're going to be playing Earth Dawn, which should be the first thing that you figure out before you try and do anything else, is have that session 0, get everybody or as many people as you can together around the table, go through the Namegiver races, go through the disciplines and the basic concepts behind them without getting into all of the heavy mechanics and whatnot, and kind of just go through that with the players and see what captures their attention, see what they are interested in, start to get like the concepts of the characters that they will be playing beforehand, and like maybe cover some of the really basic ideas and general campaign hooks or themes that you might have, which are presented in the game mastering chapter of the Game Master's book. Again, it doesn't require a lot of knowledge of lore or background history, but just like those 3 or 4 pages in the Game Master's guide that talk about different styles of campaigns, like the horror campaign, the sort of political campaign, the Therans, or various kind of themes and oppositions that you might have there. And as a game master, maybe get some idea of what kind of excites and interests you and things that you might like to explore. And so during that initial kind of discussion where you find out what kind of characters they might want to play, and start to kind of build that background and the interactions and the relationships between those characters, and start small, like have the game initially be based out of either a still sealed kaer or a kaer that is only recently opened and doesn't necessarily have a lot of where where the characters there don't have necessarily a lot of information about the surrounding world beyond what might have carried down in the oral traditions of their location. Have some kind of fairly easily pursuable and obtainable goal that they can do on those kind of early missions, whether it's to just maybe do a little bit of exploration or to secure the site where their village is going to be rebuilt, or something like that. Any kind of site that is maybe slightly off the beaten path of common trade routes and whatnot, so that you have a small scope and you don't have to worry so much about having the understanding of all of the big details and major players and all of those kind of interactions. And then maybe based on what is of interest to the player characters and to the game master, focus your research into the lore and whatnot to those things that interest you and might be featured in those early storylines and adventures, and then just kind of go from there. That's kind of what I would go. And
Yeah.
And then from a mechanical standpoint, especially if you've got new groups, you definitely want to start with brand new first circle characters. The advantage, one of the nice things about first circle characters, about new characters in Earth Dawn, is that while there are a significant number of talents in the game, the number of talents that any character has to start off with is relatively small. You know, that you'll have 6 talents, a couple of which will be fairly straightforward, basic, like on a basic attack talent of some sort. Thread weaving, which you don't even really need to worry about too much except for your magicians.
Yeah.
And then like 1 or 2 talents that will, like, that are little tricks and stuff that they can do in the course of things. And maybe if you're the GM, get at least maybe a rough idea of what they can do, of what the different disciplines that are in your player character group can do, but maybe rely more on the player characters to have to learn that mastery of their discipline talents and go from there. Mm-hmm. Where you as the GM might be focusing a little bit more on the broader rules of combat and interactions and maybe creatures and things like that, that you will need to use when you're running your games. So that's kind of where I would go and start off. And the other thing that you can do is shamelessly crib from other fantasy games and adapt adventures, either, D&D and Pathfinder adventures especially. Totally. You can kind of take some of the basic framework and ideas from some of those and adapt them to an Earth Dawn type setting. You'll need to kind of maybe, because those operate on some different like paradigms when it comes to setting and whatnot, you'll need to maybe recast or reapproach some things a little bit differently. Obviously, it's not uncommon to see D&D and Pathfinder adventures feature like evil humanoids, goblins, orcs, or whatever as opposition, and Earth Dawn doesn't really function in that space very well, in that sense. But there's still plenty of inspiration and whatnot that you can take from other games, fantasy games and so forth, and kind of go from there. Legends and history and myth are kind of a big theme in Earth Dawn, and maybe you can take some classic story templates or fairy tales or things like that and adapt and use bits of those as some inspiration for your initial kind of game setting. I know some early notes that I had in one of my very early campaigns that I never dealt with the idea of twin kaers, that there were 2 kaers for villages that were nearby, Kaer Castor and Kaer Pollux, for anybody, like blatant mythological reference there. And that the idea was that all of the players were from the newly opened Kaer Castor, and their first task was to go and locate Kaer Pollux and make contact with them, either to let them know that the scourge had ended or whatever. And kind of going from there. It never got further than sort of the initial conception stage, but you are perfectly free to take that idea and run with it as you see fit. But those are places that you can look at for ideas and inspiration and whatnot, and just go from there. I feel like I'm now kind of starting to circle around the drain and repeating stuff. No,
it's okay. One of the other ideas I've got is, crib from movies like the Seven Samurai or the Magnificent Seven. You just hire these people who are good at what they do to defend a town. Done. That's it. They get combat experience, a little bit of story experience, they get to interact with some NPCs. Easy way to start off everybody. Keep it simple, keep it low. But I ran a game called The World of Cinnabar. I'm unabashedly unashamed of this game. And since they never had published adventures, it was a 1-book system when I got it, I had to create all the adventures by myself. But the game mastering section actually had this random set of tables, because most everything in Cinnabar was a world of tables on its own. Then you basically just had to roll, in this case, a D8. I'm going to give you 6 ideas because 2 of them don't really fit into Earth Dawn a whole lot. So you could either go on a treasure hunt, you could go on a rescue, roll where, and you can go babysitting, so you can see who needs to be babysat because they're needing to be defended, like the Magnificent Seven. You can go defend a small party, or you can defend a small town. Information gathering or spying, you can send people out to go get information, or you can go have them explore. That's just a beginning of ideas. And then you got to figure out where you want it, when you want it. If you have the timeline down, we've discussed the timeline for Earth Dawn a number of episodes ago, figured all that up to current. But if you know the Bloodwood pretty well, or you know Travar pretty well, or you know Throb or Bartertown pretty well, or Parlength, pick a setting. That's all you got to do. Just keep them there. Don't let them explore a whole lot far out, but just kind of get their feet wet into a little bit of the legend, a little bit of the lore, maybe drop an item in here, drop a hint about something over there, or something they can use their skills for. Just let them, explore all the things on their character sheet. As I have had to remind my characters a number of times, read your character sheet. You have all these skills, put some of them to use. And if somebody takes something weird like, Dwarven military organizations, great, work that in somehow. I played in another game. My friend ran Serenity, and everyone had to take drawbacks and edges. And he would make notes on what your drawbacks were. My character had flashbacks, and I was an alcoholic, and so forth. And so he made all these notes, and he would eventually just work them into the campaign a little bit here and there, and reminding people, this is the drawback you chose. So one of the other things that I've done is, yes, I've run the pre-published adventures, but I approached a group of mine, 4 players only, and we had a very short time to play. And so what I said was, here's the adventure I'm going to run. And I put it aside and says, now you're all walking into the town at different areas. You're coming in by water, you're coming in by air, you're coming in by land, whatever. And I just had them role play their character. That was it. And it was just the main character introduction episode where they get to wander around town, buy things, shop for things, try and get a hotel, try and get a tavern room, or go to the bar, try and get hired, or meet people. And they would interact with all the other NPCs I could create. And eventually, organically, they happened to run into one another. And by the time all 4 of them met, great. Now I can kind of drop in the plot hook for the adventure I was going to run. So that lets everybody meet in one place, explore who their character is, what they will or not react to as far as other NPCs goading them or taunting them or trying to swindle them, steal from them, things like that. And that lets the players explore their character first, and so they get a really solid idea of them before they actually run into an actual adventure of any kind. So, that's a nice, easy way to let everybody kind of be led into the game as a whole.
Yeah, the other thing that I would suggest if everybody is kind of new to things is be willing to rewrite or retcon or rework stuff as you find out that it's not working. Especially for new players, they might take a character that they build the character and they find that there was a choice maybe that they made for their optional talent at First Circle or something like that, and find out that it's either not coming into play very often or it's not working the way that they wanted it to. And so they might want to change. And I think that it is perfectly acceptable to let them do so, especially for newer players, so that they can have a character that they like, have a character that they want to play, have a character that they enjoy. And that's happened a couple of times for characters in the Legends of Earth Dawn game, which is one now where we're up to like 7th Circle. And a couple of times, people have kind of remade their characters for various reasons. But that's something that I think should be allowed, especially for newer players.
And otherwise, have a plan. Just a little bit of, if you're the game master, have a little bit of a plan, as in I want them to go here, do this, and defeat, A, B, and C bad guys, and then it's done. It doesn't have to be the Lord of the Rings at first.
Yeah. Your early adventures, especially when you are new to the game and just getting a handle on the system and the setting and various other pieces of it, you don't need to go super complex. Everybody kind of tries to shoot for, I don't want to say everybody, but it is a common idea to go for I need to lay the groundwork and plan for my whole kind of epic 2-year campaign story arc kind of thing. I don't think it's, especially if you're newer to a game, I don't think that it's required that you do that, because that feels very intimidating, because it feels like you need to have a lot more world built and a lot more plot in place and a lot of stuff that you feel like you need to know about the setting before you get to that. Mm-hmm. Start simple, start small, start in an area where you can focus really well on some details and some things that allow you to get a handle on the game, and then start expanding from there based on what interests you or interests your players and that sort of thing. No, go ahead, Dan.
Oh, I was going to say, I want to give a shout out to, I'm listening to the Legends of Earth Dawn that you play in, And I want to give a shout out to Cliff, because at one point in the first half dozen episodes or so, you were all heading to par length, and he said, okay, I need to know which route you're going to take, so I know what to throw at you, depending upon the terrain that you're going to be going through and how long it's going to take to get there. Because it was a give and take between the players and the game master, and he fostered that by saying, let me know your plan. We'll end it right here, and that way I've got the next week or so to go plan that out, if I got to throw stuff in or take stuff out. And he knew what was going to happen to say, okay, this is the route you're going to take. I will I can't say shoehorn. I will put these obstacles in your path on purpose, or I can work this in earlier or later, depending upon that. So if you as the game master or you as the players can have that kind of give and take with the other members of this adventure you're going on, then it's very helpful for all people involved.
Yeah.
So I want to give a shout out to Cliff, who's doing a fantastic job doing that.
Absolutely. The other thing that I would mention, maybe to kind of wrap things up, because we are at about our hour mark here, is absolutely feel free to reach out for advice, whether to myself, whether on the forums or on Twitter or the Facet Games Discord. Where we've got people that are players and whatnot. The Discord can be a little intimidating because it's been around long enough that there are some regulars that have in-jokes and things like that, and I can recognize that it might feel a little bit unwelcoming to newer folks kind of coming in. But if you are looking for specific advice or suggestions about things, then definitely reach out to folks who might have some insight. But absolutely do not let us tell you how to run your game.
No. That's your game.
Because different people do have different feelings and objectives and desires. And ultimately, you and the folks around your table need to be having a good time. And that experience is unique for you. And the best that anybody can do is offer advice and suggestions on how they might have handled a similar situation in the past.
Fair. The last thing I've got before we wrap this entire thing up is I love the character-driven moments in the role-playing for Earth Dawn. So my players have, and I've encouraged this, create a character you want to write a novel about when you're done, and that way they put a whole lot of themselves into that character, or they stick with their mindset for that character. And some of the weirdest moments we've had have come from the character saying, no, I so would not go along with this, until someone else challenged them. And just that whole Gahad got risen up in a couple of instances. And so, they both challenged each other to go on this adventure that otherwise they would not normally have gone on. But if you let the players' characters shine through, everybody will have a whole lot of fun. And don't just make it combat. Hey, score, points, go. You get burned out of that pretty quickly. So if you allow the players to keep their characters involved and have their characters get some input, I find it a whole lot more fun. So that's all.
That's great.
Anyway, thank you, Shannon, for the lovely
email
impetus for the discussion that we just had for the last 25 minutes or so. Absolutely appreciate everybody emailing in. Mostly an Email-Palooza episode, I guess.
Basically. If you have questions, comments, advice for Shannon or anybody else that you want to share with the community, feel free to send those to us, edsgpodcast@gmail.com. We do emails every couple of episodes because we do tend to get a few and find that the discussion and questions that those prompt is as interesting and entertaining as the more planned episodes that we planned, like we plan, that we have as part of our situation.
Yeah, because we bump the planned episodes for your emails.
So please keep those coming. It certainly helps us know that there are people out there listening and enjoying what we're doing and giving us that impetus and drive to continue doing this, hopefully for at least another 40-odd episodes.
Absolutely. So until then, folks, it is time for you to go make your own legend, and we'd love to hear about it when you do.
Good night.